The 1990s may look like a dark age of strange little cars, but hiding in that decade were some of the most powerful muscle machines GM ever built. These 12 cars were loud, fast, and unforgettable, and today they stand tall as true collectibles. Number 12, 1990 Chevrolet Corvette ZR1. Starting with the Corvette ZR1. The heart of this car is an engine that sounds like thunder and pulls like a rocket. It is called the LT5, a 350 cubic inch V8 with 32 valves and 2 camshafts on each head, all made from aluminum to keep it strong yet light. This is not some ordinary motor, because it was designed with help from Lotus engineers and then built with the precision of Mercury Marine. When you press the pedal, the power comes alive in a way that bends your mind. With 375 horsepower, roaring at 5,800 revolutions per minute, and a torque curve so wide it feels endless. At 5,000 revolutions, the engine makes 370 pound-feet of twist, which means it shoves you forward like a catapult every time you shift. Now here's where things get even more exciting, because this Corvette ZR1 does not just make numbers, it proves them. From 0 to 60 miles per hour, it takes only 4.5 seconds. And to reach 100 miles per hour, it needs only 10.4 seconds. Keep your foot down, and in less than 30 seconds, it will touch 150 miles per hour. For the truly daring, the top speed stretches all the way to 175 miles per hour. That is not just quick, that is almost too much quickness for the human brain to process, yet somehow this car keeps you safe while doing it. The transmission is just as much a hero here. A 6-speed manual gearbox, built tough enough to handle over 420 pound-feet of torque, is ready for smooth shifts whether you crawl through traffic or fly down a mountain road. The clutch pedal is easy on your leg, and the gear lever moves with a precision that feels satisfying every single time. To make sure the government did not slap extra taxes for being thirsty, Chevrolet added a smart computer system that can guide you into higher gears, which saves fuel while still letting you enjoy the ride. But what about keeping all that speed in control? That is where the suspension and brakes show their talent. The ZR1 carries vented disc brakes, huge 13-inch rotors up front and 12-inch in the back, stopping the car from 70 miles per hour in just 170 feet. They do not fade even when used again and again, which means the car can run hard all day without losing its confidence. The suspension mixes fiberglass springs, gas-filled shocks, and thick anti-roll bars, plus an electronic system with 3 modes: touring, sport, and performance. With a simple switch, the car can feel calm and smooth or razor-sharp for corners. And then there are the tires, so wide at the back that it looks like they barely fit. The rear wheels carry 315-section rubber while the front rolls on 275-section tires. They grip so tightly it feels as if the car is glued to the road, and even warn you with sensors if the pressure drops by only 1 pound per square inch. Number 11, 1993 Chevrolet Camaro Z28. Now let us talk about the next chapter of American muscle, the 1993 Chevrolet Camaro Z28. The heartbeat of this machine is the LT1, a 350 cubic inch V8 engine that came straight from Corvette knowledge, only now living in a Camaro body with a lot to prove. It pumped out 275 horsepower, along with 325 pound-feet of torque, and the way it delivered that punch made it feel as if the engine never ran out of breath. The low-end torque pulled like a freight train leaving the station, while the cruising power kept you grinning long after the speedometer was well past ordinary numbers. Here comes the fun twist, because Chevrolet paired this motor with a 6-speed manual transmission, a gearbox that drivers still talk about today with wide smiles. It was called the T56, and it made each gear change so crisp that you felt like a hero even if all you did was go grab some groceries. Chevrolet even bragged that this engine and transmission were made for each other, and after one drive it was hard to argue, because the Camaro pulled strong from down low and kept pulling until you questioned if the laws of physics had taken a vacation. So how quick was it really? From 0 to 60 miles per hour, it took only the mid 5-second range, which at the time was faster than many of the muscle car legends from the 60s. In the quarter mile, it could dip into the 13-second range. And that was straight off the showroom floor without a single wrench turned. The numbers were proof, but the real story was how easy it was to unleash them, because this Camaro felt eager every time you touched the throttle. Handling did not take a backseat either. because Chevrolet gave it wide 245-section tires wrapped around 16-inch wheels, plus four-wheel disc brakes with strength that stopped it with authority. Add in a limited slip differential, and suddenly all that torque turned into forward motion instead of tire smoke. Unless, of course, you wanted smoke, in which case the Camaro is happy to deliver. And here's the truth that surprises many people, because while this Z28 had muscle to spare, it also had the brains to sip fuel gently on the highway. Thanks to smart gearing and its aerodynamic shape, it could cruise for long stretches with efficiency that embarrassed some of the smaller cars of its day. Number 10, 1996 Chevrolet Camaro SS SLP. Now picture this, a Chevrolet Camaro SS from 1996 that did not just get a strong engine. It got one that practically shouted for attention. Under the hood sat a 350 cubic inch LT1 V8. And if that does not make your heart skip, then wait until you hear what SLP engineering did with it. They gave it a high-flow air intake, a performance exhaust, and the kind of tuning that made 300 horsepower sound like it had been drinking rocket fuel for breakfast. The torque came in at 335 pound-feet, and that meant you were pushed back into the seat so hard you might check if your wallet was still in your pocket. But here's the part that makes people laugh in disbelief. Because this Camaro could run from 0 to 60 miles per hour in 5.3 seconds. That is faster than many so-called legends from decades before. And in the quarter mile, it stormed through in 13.7 seconds at 102 miles per hour. Numbers like that in 1996 were enough to make even the most confident Mustang driver suddenly remember he needed milk from the store. And we are not done yet because the transmission was a Borg-Warner T56 6-speed manual. This gearbox shifted with such precision that even if you had butterfingers, you still felt like a pro. The clutch was firm enough to feel real but never cruel to your left leg. And together the engine and transmission made a pair that loved to be pushed again and again. The suspension was not left stock either because SLP added their Level 1 package with stronger anti-roll bars and revised tuning. That meant corners stopped being scary and started being fun. The Camaro could take sharp turns with confidence, and the big four-wheel disc brakes with anti-lock system meant it stopped almost as impressively as it accelerated. And with 17-inch wheels wearing wide rubber from BF Goodrich, the car clung to the road with the grip of a hungry raccoon holding a sandwich. And here is a detail that really makes this S special, because only 2,410 were built that year, and out of those, only 77 were painted in teal. Even rarer, just 10 teal convertibles existed, and only 7 of them were built with a 6-speed manual. That means this Camaro is one of 7, a number that car fans whisper about like it is a magic spell. Number 9, 1998 Chevrolet Camaro Z28. Here comes the real thunder, because the 1998 Camaro Z28 showed up with a brand new heart, the LS1 V8 engine. This was not just a small upgrade, it was a complete revolution. The engine block was made from aluminum instead of heavy iron. So right away the car lost weight like it had just gone on a diet plan that actually worked. And with that lighter build came more speed, more control, and a sound that could make even your neighbors forgive the early morning revs. The LS1 delivered 305 horsepower, and in the SS version that jumped up to 320 horsepower. But the story does not end there, because torque came alive across the whole rev range, pulling with such force that you might wonder if gravity had been turned down a notch. Push the gas pedal, and the Camaro launched forward like it had just remembered it was late for work. Here's a little fun twist. The car had the Borg-Warner T56 6-speed manual transmission as a no-cost option, and that meant pure driver joy. The shifts clicked into place with authority, and the gearing let you wring every last ounce of power from the engine. For those who preferred to let the car handle things, there was also a 4-speed automatic, but let's be honest, the 6-speed was where the real party happened. Now wait until you hear this, because the change to the LS1 was not just about raw muscle. The motor had new tech that made it breathe better, burn cleaner, and rev higher. Things like coil-on-plug ignition, a thermoplastic intake, and sequential fuel injection gave it brains to match the brawn. And the result, 0 to 60 miles per hour, could now drop below 5 seconds, which meant the Camaro Z28 was stepping into territory once reserved for exotic cars and halo machines. And then there was the style update to remind everyone this was a new era. Dual rounded headlights replaced the squared ones, and the big front opening gulped down air to keep that motor cool. 16-inch alloy wheels came standard, showing off disc brakes on all 4 corners. Proof that this pony car was ready to stop as fiercely as it could go. The suspension kept its live axle at the back, which meant tail-happy fun whenever the driver wanted. Yet with its improved balance and the new motor leading the charge, the 1998 Camaro Z28 became the kind of machine that turned every drive into an event worth remembering. Number 8, 1990, Pontiac Firebird Trans Am GTA. And then came a car that made people raise their eyebrows the moment they heard what lived under the hood. The 1990 Pontiac Firebird Trans Am GTA carried a 350 cubic inch L98 V8, the same engine you would find in a Corvette of the time. And that fact alone gave it bragging rights. This motor was rated at 225 to 245 horsepower and a thunderous 330 to 345 pound-feet of torque. Numbers that meant when you pressed the gas pedal, the car did not politely move forward. It shoved you like a bully on a playground. Here's the fun part that always makes enthusiasts chuckle, because while this engine had big numbers, it also had something called tuned port fuel injection, which basically meant the air and fuel were fed into the motor in a way that made low-end torque come alive like a puppy that just spotted a tennis ball. The car did not need to scream all the way to the top of the rev range to deliver fun. It gave you power early and often, making stoplight launches something you could brag about at lunch the next day. And that torque figure, 345 pound-feet, was the kind of muscle that made even heavier cars of the era feel like they were skipping leg day at the gym. The GTA pulled with authority in any gear, and with the 4-speed automatic sending that power to a limited slip differential, both rear wheels were ready to dig into the pavement and claw for traction. If you are wondering whether that meant tire smoke was just a breath away, well, yes, it absolutely did, and many owners proved it by leaving long rubber signatures on their local streets. Now, some might ask, could a car with pop-up headlights, leather seats, and air conditioning still deliver excitement? The answer comes as soon as you feel the WS6 suspension package doing its work. The engineers gave it stiffer springs, beefier sway bars, and tighter steering, so that the car could actually dance through corners instead of tripping over its own shoelaces. And with 4-wheel disc brakes, you had the confidence that when you did get a little carried away with the throttle, you could reel it all back in without sending the car into the bushes. Everywhere you looked, the Firebird Trans Am GTA was dressed for the part. 16-inch gold snowflake wheels gave it style that shouted louder than a marching band, while the rumble of that V8 let everyone know that the show was not just about looks. And that is exactly why this car became such a legend. Number 7, 1996 Pontiac Firebird Trans Am WS6. In 1996, the Trans Am WS6 showed up and made sure everyone knew it was not just a car, it was a declaration. Right under its boldly styled hood sat a 350 cubic inch small block V8. And here's where the fun begins, because this was no ordinary engine. Pontiac gave it special tuning so that instead of the base car's 285 horsepower, the WS6 version roared with 305 horsepower and 335 pound-feet of torque. That means every time you touched the gas pedal, the car answered like it was triple espresso awake and ready to sprint. But here's the part that gets even better. The torque arrived at just over 3,000 revolutions per minute, so you did not have to wait until the engine screamed to feel the push. It was like having a bodyguard who steps in before trouble even starts. You tap the pedal, the car lunges forward, and you suddenly realize the phrase "hold on tight" was invented for this very moment, and now comes the little twist that people sometimes forget. The WS6 was not only about raw numbers, it came with a ram air hood that shoved more cool air straight into the motor. Think of it like feeding an athlete oxygen right before the race. Only here the result was more power, more sound, and more bragging rights. And to make sure all of that fury went where it should, you had a choice between the Tremec T56 6-speed manual or the GM4L60E 4-speed automatic. One was built for people who loved to row their own gears. The other was for those who just wanted to stomp and go. Now picture this, because the suspension was not left behind. Pontiac upgraded the handling with stiffer parts, wider tires, and that famous WS6 badge at the back. The car did not just go fast in a straight line. It carved through corners with a confidence that almost made you forget you were in a muscle car. Almost. And here comes the real thunderclap, because by the late 90s, this WS6 would swap in the LS1 engine with 320 horsepower, and then jump to 325 with 350 pound-feet of torque, thanks to the LS6 intake. Suddenly, the Trans Am WS6 was running shoulder to shoulder with cars people called exotic. Number 6, 1998 Pontiac Trans Am Firehawk. Now let's talk about the Pontiac Trans Am Firehawk of 1998, because this is where the story takes a wild twist. Right under that hood sat the mighty LS1 V8, the very same heart that lived in the Corvette. But here it was massaged and tuned by SLP. The result was not just power, but power turned up louder than your neighbor's lawnmower at 6 in the morning. The Firehawk pumped out 327 horsepower and 345 pound-feet of torque, numbers that made Mustang owners suddenly look nervous. When you press the pedal, the Firehawk does not ask questions, it gives orders. 0 to 60 miles per hour, just 5 flat seconds. The quarter mile, 13.5 seconds at 106 miles per hour. And here's the funny part. A regular Trans Am was already quick, but the Firehawk turned it into something your uncle with a supercharged Mustang would not want to line up against at the drag strip. You could almost hear that Ram air system gulping for air like a kid with a giant soda straw, feeding the engine more oxygen and unlocking even more high-rev punch. But raw numbers are only part of the fun. The Firehawk kept its cool even when we ran it flat out to a top speed of 158 miles per hour. The exhaust was less restricted, so it had a deep rumble that was music to the ears. But guess what? It was still quiet enough that your mom would not complain on the highway. That balance between rowdy performance and livable comfort is what made this car so different from all the others. Cornering, surprisingly sharp. Thanks to thicker sway bars, progressive springs, and Bilstein shocks, the Firehawk stayed flat in turns, gripping with 0.88 G on the skid pad. It felt like the suspension had a sense of humor too, soft over bumps, stiff when you wanted to attack an off-ramp. And with optional gear like the Auburn limited slip differential, launches at the drag strip turned into tire-smoking fireworks. The looks sealed the deal. Those projector headlights with carbon fiber housings were not just flashy, they saved weight and sliced through the wind. The big scooped hood did not just sit there for style. It shoved cold air straight into that hungry engine. And when you saw the bold Firehawk graphics on the side, you already knew this car was not here for small talk. Even the wheels and tires told the story. 17-inch alloys wrapped in 275-wide Firestone Firehawk rubber, gripping the pavement and daring the driver to unleash every bit of torque. And the cabin may have looked familiar, but that Firehawk badge on the console was the perfect reminder that this was not just another pony car, this was the ultimate F-body. Number 5, 1996 Chevrolet Impala SS. Now, the Chevrolet Impala SS of 1996 took things in a very different direction, and the secret was under its hood. Sitting there was the LT1 350 cubic inch V8, the very same engine that had already made the Corvette famous. When people heard that line, "It has the Corvette motor," they suddenly leaned forward in their seats. This engine was no ordinary lump of iron. It made 260 horsepower and 330 pound-feet of torque, numbers that turned a family-sized sedan into something that could run with proper muscle cars. Push the throttle, and the Impala SS would leap forward with a growl that sounded more like a sports car than a sedan with 4 doors. It could sprint from 0 to 60 miles per hour in just 6.5 seconds, and cover the quarter mile in 15 seconds flat at 92 miles per hour. Think about that. A full-size car with room for the kids was quicker than most of the coupes from the 1960s that wore the same badge. That is the kind of trivia that makes Mustang drivers start coughing into their coffee cups. But the fun did not stop at straight-line speed. The Impala SS had been built on the bones of the police package Caprice, and that meant serious hardware underneath. Decarbon shocks, a lowered suspension, and big 12.1-inch disc brakes gave this heavy sedan handling that was far sharper than anyone expected. Toss it into a corner, and instead of rolling over like a sleepy couch, it dug in and gripped the pavement, showing that the engineers had done their homework. Styling added to the punchline. Gone was the bright trim that made the Caprice look like your uncle's company car, replaced by monotone bodywork, a new grille, and a small spoiler that gave the whole car a menacing stance. Dark colors, like black or dark cherry, made it look like Darth Vader had traded in his TIE fighter for a sedan, and that comparison was not lost on anyone. The Hofmeister kink in the rear pillar, the larger aluminum wheels, and the wide tires made sure you knew this was not a car built for quiet grocery runs. The cabin also told its own story. High-back leather seats, a center console, and in 1996, finally a floor shifter paired with a tachometer, all made the driver feel like this car was meant to be pushed. And even though it was still a 4-speed automatic, the way that LT1 motor pulled through each gear left no doubt this was a true supersport. Number 4, 1995 Buick Riviera Supercharged. And just when you think the parade of 90s muscle had finished, along comes a car with a very different badge but a very serious surprise waiting under its hood. The 1995 Buick Riviera Supercharged did not waste time trying to convince anyone with gimmicks, because its real bragging rights came from the engine. Sitting there was a 232 cubic inch V6 with a supercharger strapped on, and that little tornado maker gave it 225 horsepower and 275 pound-feet of torque. That means when you press the pedal, you did not just move forward, you practically announced yourself to traffic like a marching band with trumpets turned to maximum volume. The beauty of that motor was how it delivered its power. Instead of making you wait until the needles screamed high, the supercharger built its boost right from the lower ranges. That gave the car a shove that felt almost unfair compared to regular V6 engines of the time. It was like bringing a water balloon to a fight and then realizing you were secretly holding a fire hose. People expected smoothness from a Buick, but what they got here was smoothness combined with punch, and that made for a very different kind of smile on the driver's face. Now let us not forget how this engine partnered with the 4-speed automatic transmission. Many thought an automatic would dull the excitement, yet the way this Riviera shifted gears was so quick and well-tuned, it felt like the car had been paying attention to your mood swings. Accelerating onto a highway, it dropped down eagerly. Cruising with one hand on the wheel, it stayed calm and steady. Numbers tell their own tale here, because this Riviera could sprint from 0 to 60 miles per hour in 7.2 seconds and run the quarter mile in 15.6 seconds at 90 miles per hour. For a large, front-wheel drive, luxury coupe from the mid-90s, that was no small achievement. In fact, it put the Buick right in the company of cars with fancy badges and much larger V8 engines. What made it even more fascinating was how civilized it remained. The sound from that supercharged V6 was not loud or obnoxious. It was distant and confident, the sort of voice that told you it had power in reserve without needing to shout about it. The dual exhausts added just enough attitude, reminding you that this was no ordinary commuter car. And because the motor was so eager from the very start, even short city drives felt like they had a hint of excitement built into them. The strength of this car was not simply in raw speed, but in how that power blended with comfort. Buick had built plenty of smooth cruisers before, but giving this Riviera the kind of acceleration that nipped at the heels of sports coupes gave it a double personality. Number 3, 1997 Chevrolet Monte Carlo Z34. And then the story rolled forward to another American two-door that carried its own reputation with pride, the 1997 Chevrolet Monte Carlo Z34, and the secret to its energy lived under the hood. The car came alive with a 207 cubic inch V6 engine that made 215 horsepower, and when that number hit the pavement, it felt like someone had just turned the volume knob all the way to full blast. This was not about quiet cruising anymore. This was about showing what front-wheel drive muscle could do when Chevrolet got serious. The fun started the moment you pressed the accelerator, because the torque climbed fast and strong, pushing the Monte Carlo forward like a linebacker charging through the line. Drivers quickly learned that this V6 loved to climb through the revs. And while the competition leaned on bigger motors, this one proved you did not always need 8 cylinders to make a car feel eager. It was the kind of engine that never asked if you were ready, it simply assumed you were, and then pulled with a confidence that surprised everyone. Now here is where curiosity takes over, because in 1998, the Z34 traded its original motor for a new 232 cubic inch V6. At first, people wondered if the smaller motor had the real magic, but then the surprise arrived, because this new version pumped out 200 horsepower, along with extra torque, giving the car an even stronger mid-range punch. Suddenly, passing on the highway felt effortless, as though the Monte Carlo had been holding back a second gear of energy just for fun. Even better, the 4-speed automatic transmission worked hand in hand with both engines, never fumbling, never hesitating, and always ready to drop a gear when you asked for more. That made the Z34 not only quick, but also easy to drive hard, with no guesswork required. Add in the sport suspension that kept it steady and those 16-inch alloy wheels gripping firmly, and the car became more than just a stylish coupe. It became proof that Chevrolet still knew how to give drivers a thrill even without a V8 badge. Number 2, 1994 Chevrolet Corvette L T1 Coupe. Even when the Monte Carlo proved how strong a V6 could feel, Chevrolet was already lining up something with even more muscle to remind the world that raw power and high technology could share the same garage. The 1994 Chevrolet Corvette LT1 Coupe put its entire reputation on the shoulders of a 350 cubic inch V8 that shouted 300 horsepower at 5,000 revolutions per minute, and that number alone made hearts beat faster. What really set this engine apart was the new sequential port fuel injection system, because instead of squirting fuel like a garden hose at the whole intake, it timed each injector perfectly with the firing order of the cylinders, meaning smoother idle, sharper throttle response, and a kick of acceleration that felt almost too good to be true. Now imagine pressing the accelerator and feeling 340 pound-feet of torque slam you into the seat while the attach needle climbs. And here's the funny part. This engine was so eager to wake up on a cold morning, it practically begged for a blanket just to calm down. That kind of quick start mattered, because whether you lived in the desert heat or snow country, the LT1 did not believe in lazy mornings. It was always ready, always sharp, and always daring you to push harder. Of course, big power only shines if the transmission can dance with it, and drivers got a choice between a 6-speed manual that made you feel like part of a race team, or a 4-speed automatic that used electronic control to shift with surgeon precision. Either way, the power never got lost. And here's where the curiosity builds, because people often ask if the Corvette could really handle all that muscle when the weather turned nasty. The answer was yes, and the secret came from traction control, 4-wheel disc brakes with anti-lock technology, and Goodyear Eagle GESC tires that loved both dry pavement and wet roads. Every stomp on the pedal turned into forward motion without useless wheel spin, and every panic stop kept the car stable instead of sliding like a hockey puck. With an independent suspension built from aluminum components keeping the tires planted, the Corvette proved you could laugh your way through rain, snow, or sunshine. And just when you thought the story stopped at the engine and chassis, the cockpit welcomed you with leather sport seats, power adjustments, and a 2-spoke steering wheel that fit like a glove, turning every trip into an event worth remembering. Number 1. 1996 Chevrolet Corvette Grand Sport C4. And just when the LT1 had already convinced everyone that 300 horsepower was more than enough, Chevrolet dropped one final surprise for the 4th generation, and it came roaring with an even stronger heart. The 1996 Corvette Grand Sport carried a 350 cubic inch V8 called the LT4, and the moment you learned it made 330 horsepower at 5,800 revolutions per minute, you realized this was no farewell whisper. It was a full-throttle shout. The engineers reworked the cylinder heads with wider ports, bumped the compression higher, added hollow valve stems, stronger springs, and even stretched the redline to 6,300 revolutions per minute. That meant this car did not just pull harder, it loved to scream higher, and the fun only grew as the needle climbed. Now, here's where things get funny, because while the torque rating only jumped by 5 pound-feet, peaking at 340 pound-feet, the twist arrived later in the rev range, 4,500 revolutions per minute. Not only this, LT4 sharpened the throttle so much it felt like the car could read your mind before you even moved your toes. Of course, all that energy needed the right partner, and the only option was a 6-speed manual transmission that made every shift feel like flipping a switch on a rocket. Suddenly, you had total control of when to drop the hammer, and the higher breathing motor rewarded every extra rev with a surge that kept you grinning. Add in the fact that bigger ZR1-style wheels and Eagle GSC tires came along for the ride, and traction became its own kind of magic trick. Curiosity builds again. You notice the suspension choices because you could have the base setup, the F45 selective real-time dampening, or the spine-testing Z51 package. Each one changed the flavor of how the car cornered, yet all of them reminded you that the Grand Sport carried grip numbers that kept it standing tall against some of the strongest rivals from Japan. Which one of these 90s GM muscle cars would you take for a spin first? Drop your pick in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more.